The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the CCIS webinar. How can you effectively engage children with learning differences in your classroom? This webinar has been done by Sue Ahn and Kevin Good from George Mason University. I will hand over to them now.
So good afternoon, and actually for us it's good morning. Welcome to the webinar and how to effectively engage students who have difficulties or who have students with disabilities. Just a quick introduction. My name is Sue Ahn, and I am here with Kevin Good, and we're both PhD students at George Mason. Our colleague Rachel was unable to make it this morning, but she definitely helped in forming and creating these PowerPoint slides. If you have any questions, we will have some time at the end, so if you can just hold off until then, or you can also type in your question in the message box and then we'll address them at the end. We'll leave about 15 minutes before the hour is over.
All right, so some of the things that we're going to cover today is a working definition of students with learning differences, how these can present in the classroom or your classroom, the importance of formative and summative assessments. We're also going to discuss some instructional strategies that you can use in your classroom, and one that we're hoping that you can walk out the door today with as a strategy to start using in your classroom tomorrow, as well as point you to some online resources where you can find more information or tutorials to set up some of the things that we discuss. So for the purposes of our webinar today, we've defined learning differences or learning support students as those students who require targeted, strategic instruction and our strategies that enhances their learning environment or their learning and achievement. We've kind of put these together to kind of give you a more broad sense of some of the things that you could see in your classroom besides sticking with very hardline definitions. This is kind of our definition for the purpose of this presentation so that you can apply it to the most students possible in your classroom. So how can these learning differences that we are defining present in your classroom? Here are some characteristics of learning differences that you may see or that you may already see in your classroom. Some include slow auditory or visual processing, disorganized writing, inattention, difficulty making friends, talking too much, fidgeting, word retrieval issues. And there's many others that we're sure that you've experienced in your classroom, and please feel free to ask us, but we've hoped that we've kind of hit along the lines of a lot of these to give you some ideas of things to use in your classroom. And this was developed by the National Association of Special Education Teachers, who kind of came up with this list of what you could be seeing in your classroom.
So I just wanted to kind of go over formative and summative assessment. So formative is evaluating both formally and informally to see if the students are learning the concept being presented. So it's an ongoing process, whether it's once a class, multiple times per class, just to see the students understanding what you're teaching. So for example, a warm-up or even an exit ticket or opportunities to respond through whiteboards. Those are all formative assessments so that you can understand if you need to slow down, review, just a check-in point. It can be a quiz as well. Summative assessment is usually at the end of a larger chunk of learning. So usually like a conclusion of a unit or a semester or a year, just to assess the overarching understanding of a particular information. Both are really important, and one of the reasons why we want to stress this today is because we'll be presenting with a lot of different strategies that can be used for students, and strategies, just because it sounds good, isn't meant to be one size fits all. You want to make sure that your continued assessment matches with the strategies that's presented. So just to be thoughtful and purposeful in choosing the strategies for the student that you see needs that support. So we're just going to go ahead and talk about the instructional strategies. The first type is the multisensory that is really useful for, like I said, all students, but especially students who have difficulties, and basically it's the way students learn content through 2 or more senses, including sight, sound, taste, touch, smell, and kinesthetic. So visuals to illustrate spoken directions. A lot of students who have processing deficits, especially auditory, visuals to, especially younger students, visuals to give certain directions or what you expect them to do is a really great way for students not to be overwhelmed by the senses, especially students you see maybe presenting specific exhibit certain behaviors that may be similar to students on the spectrum. Songs and chants with movements to teach new materials are also really great. I used to teach middle school, and even though they're a little bit older, they still did respond really well to songs and chants. It's a great way to help with keeping the information and learning new information. Writing in powder, jello, or shaving cream, that's a way for them to engage sight and smell and touch. And it's great to just put it on the table, have them practice their letterings or whatnot, and then easy to clean up. Interactive books, obviously there's sounds and sight with that as well. And teaching new letter by saying it, touching and a raised outline of it and then drawing it in the air really engages all of those senses at the same time. Obviously you're not limited to these, but just to give you an idea of how to incorporate more than one sense at a time to teach really does help students with difficulties learn it in very different ways. So active responding. This is really important, not just for students with disabilities, but all students, which is allowing students to respond multiple times. It really builds fluency, and I'm sure you've seen students in your class where they may get it at one point and then they forget, or they may understand it in one context but not in another. So having them have active responding or multiple opportunities to respond allows them to have a lot of different practice opportunities to gain their fluency and hopefully generalize and maintain their understanding as well. So one of the easiest ways is to do whiteboard responding, where students write their answers and they share them when they're prompted. It can be quite expensive, so if you don't have whiteboards, another way to do it is to laminate white papers. You can have them even use the whiteboard markers and draw on their desks. You can get those plastic sleeves that you can put the paper in and have them practice on that. So those are very cheap, easy ways to use whiteboard responding. Response cards, you can have pre-printed cards. On one side have yes, the other side have no, and have them hold them up. That can be done with 2 cards, A, B, C, and D, if you're practicing multiple choice you're practicing multiple choice games or questions. Corners or line responding, you can have students go to different corners to answer. So you can say back left corner is A. So everyone who thinks that A is the right answer, they can move to that corner and so forth. You can do show me. This is really quick and easy way that I use all the time. Use their hands to signal. They can do it in front of them so that the other students are not looking, so it doesn't shame them if they get it wrong. They can answer by saying I agree, I don't agree, I'm not sure, with their thumbs up, down, and sideways. You can also do a quick formative assessment with this. Do you understand this? Yes, no, a little bit. Think, pair, share, square. Students think about their response and then they share with their partner and then they join with the other pair and then share again. That gives them a chance to think through what they're understanding and to work with others collaboratively. Choral response. Again, other multiple opportunities for students to practice to increase their frequency is to have them signal the students to just respond together over and over again. If you need more ideas for active responding, you can use a link down there. But there are so many different ways to engage students where students are not waiting for their turn. So, because a lot of times when you do like an open question, one student gets to answer and the other students just listen. This gives all the students time to respond, so they're not feeling idle, in which they get distracted and then not engaged. So active responding is very important for all students, especially those who get distracted very easily. So assessment or tests. Many students with learning differences have test anxiety. So this is built on years and years of feeling frustrated, not knowing, feeling like a failure. So this test anxiety not only obviously gives a feeling of anxiety, but also affects them in the way that they can't produce or show what they know because of this anxiety. So there are different ways of getting assessment from the students without looking like assessment or looking like tests. One is that obviously active responding, like I said, is a form of formative assessment to get a quick understanding of where they are. Verbal assessment, so a lot of students have difficulties writing. So, you know, whether it's more of a tactile issue or more difficult, or written disability. Sometimes having someone verbal assessment, whether it's to a teacher, voice to text, audio recording, and I know Kevin's going to talk about voice to text later, which you can get free and it's easily accessible. All those ways are a great way to assess whether the students know the content and not whether they can produce it on written form. Another thing that I like to do and the students really enjoy is a round the world game, where I give students a blank piece of paper with numbers in boxes. So let's say if there are 15 questions, or let's say, yeah, 16 questions on a quiz, I'll put 8 boxes in the front of the page, 8 boxes in the back of the page, and then number them accordingly. And then I would cut out the questions, multiple of each question, and then I'll hide it all over by taping it in different parts of the room. And then the students will then, and I'll put some kind of fun music on, just go around the different parts of the room with a clipboard, and they'll look for the questions and then write down the answers in the corresponding boxes with the numbers. It's a really fun way to get to quiz them without feeling like a quiz, but have them move around, and the music also allows them to not feel like they have to talk to other students, obviously, since they can't do that as a quiz. Another way to do is a green, yellow, red pen. So if you look on the right side of the PowerPoint, you see the 3 questions. And you give the students 3 color pens, and when they're answering, they can use green if you look at the second question, how many states in the USA? They can use green to mark the answer if they're absolutely certain. They can use yellow or orange to mark the answer if they're kind of certain, and then red if they're completely guessing. So this allows you not only to see if they can get it right or wrong, but whether when they get it right, if it's by pure guessing. So you know how to go back and help them, review with them to the place that they don't understand. Short answers instead of multiple choice, or vice versa, depending on the students. Some students cannot do multiple choice. They have difficulties limiting their answers to the word choice that you formed, so they need short answers instead. Some students cannot answer in short answers because they don't know how to formulate the words to represent what they know, so multiple choice is more appropriate. So depending on the student, even if the rest of your class is doing one, it may be prudent for you to provide the other method of showing what they know. Another way to do an assessment is to do be the teacher. So instead of having the students answer questions, have already a filled out question and have them check the answer or grade the paper, so that it sounds like they feel it's a different form of assessment, right? If they are able to correct the mistakes on the paper, then you know that they know that understanding or that concept. For younger kids, I like to do something silly where I like to put my dog's name as a student who filled out the the test and said, my dog is a genius and he can do algebra or something like that, and the student's get a kick out of it. And again, warm-ups and exit tickets are a great way to do short, quick assessment, a really good way to form a structure in the classroom, so as soon as students come in, they know what to do. A lot of students who have difficulties, learn difficulties and behavior difficulties, need that kind of structure where there is no lull time. They know exactly what's expected when they come in, so this also prohibits any kind of buffer time that they can get distracted or in trouble. And then strategies to increase attention. So how to get students who have learning difficulties to get more involved with the instruction itself. We just talked about multi-sensory learning, the different ways to engage different senses at once. That will definitely engage students and increase attention. Also, guided and closed notes are a great way for students, especially with difficulties with writing or students who have fine motor skill difficulties that, who not only because they can't produce the words, but also physically have difficulties. If you can have notes already written, so if you look on the right side, there are blanks, those are closed notes. So it's already written for them, just a few blanks that they can just fill out. This is good for students with processing issues where they can't listen and write easily at the same time. Or if they even have difficulties with that, if you look above them, you can have it all written out for them and give them a highlighter to just highlight important information that you tell them to highlight. So that's the action of actually highlighting as well as listening and looking at it will help them to increase attention. So a lot of times if they have to do free form note-taking, they'll just look at you blankly and daydream. But if they actually have something in their hands that they have to move, it engages them and increase attention. Graphic organizers also they're great ways to be able to organize their information in their minds, things that we take for granted. So there are a plethora of different types of organizers depending on what you need and what content that you're teaching. Including math, you can always do boxes for word problems, but not just that. You can do boxes, kind of like closed notes, so that students know that there has to be a digit in a certain box. Scaffolding, so a little bit of time, not too much at once. This is really important for students who have learning difficulties. A lot of information at once can be overwhelming. So whether it's content or even just words on a paper, if you give them a little bit of time, the students are able to absorb it a lot better. So for example, if you have a 10-question worksheet, that could be great for typical learning peers. For these students, it might be more helpful to have only 2 questions that are given, and after they finish those 2 questions, you can give them 2 more, or something like that. Self-regulation, have them check themselves to see if they're paying attention. So I like to give them an erase marker that with a quiet timer, so in timed every 5 minutes. And then if they're quiet or if they're engaged for 5 minutes, they can give themselves a tick mark, and those tick marks can equal a small reward. Or you can do paper, or you can do whatever that you think is not distracting to other students, that the students can take the ownership to themselves to be able to take responsibility for their own learning. And there's some kind of, if it's coupled with some type of rewards, it's very useful, and it's very, it works really, really well. Flipped classroom is something that is becoming more popular that I've done with myself. Students with slower processing or processing difficulties, I would make short videos that they can learn at home. So they can rewind the videos, learn it, practice it at their own time, which is also great for students who miss class or miss the school day. And then what they do is when they come to school, they do independent practice of what they've already learned at home. So the learning is at their own pace and practice at school. And then, you know, when they're doing independent work, they can flag you if they need help. But basically, it's the opposite of what's traditional classrooms. Student menus, always having students choose gives them feeling of ownership of their learning. So if they're reading, you can give them a choice. Do you want to do silent reading, read out loud, or pair reading? Different types of activities. Those are always great for students to feel like they are contributing or they're part of the learning. Direct instruction, I do, we do, you do. I'm sure you've heard of this before, but always model what you're asking them to do, have them do it with you, and then have them do it by themselves or with a pair. This model is evidence-based, it works, and it also allows students to get engaged more frequently. And the most important thing is talk less, which I am not showing right now, but students only have about 10 or 15 minutes of attention span. So use these to help you talk less but give more instruction and direction, like giving opportunities to respond. I do only for like 5-10 minutes, we do for 5-10 minutes, you do for 5-10 minutes. All those ways allows you to use less lecturing and more engaging.
So something else that you can do is to really get your whole classroom involved, and that's through what's called peer involvement or class-wide peer tutoring. It's a strategy that really allows students to support each other in the learning environment. And earlier we talked about formative and summative assessments. This is one of those strategies where you really need to rely on some of that information to set up a good class-wide peer tutoring model. Because you as a teacher will pair higher performing students with lower performing students. So you kind of need to know where your students are. And when you do this, you pair your highest performer with your highest low performer in the targeted area. And the reason I say targeted area is because this can be used in math and reading and science and various subjects when you're learning new information, when you're verifying that students know things, that they can really work together. And the reason you pair your highest with your lowest highest is that you want to make sure that they're comparable. You don't want to make a sense of struggle between the two. You want them to feel like they're partners in the learning. And that'll become a little more clear when I talk about some of the things that it incorporates. And that's will help the students complete activities and focus on the targeted skills. So what does this really kind of look like? What are you going to include in this class-wide peer tutoring model? It's a multimodality format, and that's some of the things that we've already talked about, that you can use various modalities. It's reciprocal and distributed practice. So the students are going to take turns. One will be what's called the coach, while the other's the learner, and they'll actually switch those roles. So that way they each have that sense of empowerment to learn information. There's immediate and error correction and feedback because they're checking each other as it's happening. There's the game format, and the benefit of the game format is that you're encouraging students to perform highly in your classroom. So it's not a huge competition so much as making sure that your groups have the information that they need, and they can earn points and different things like that. There's also built-in reinforcement because you're pairing students together, so if they're working together, you can also include some other reinforcements through the game format that they earn certain things at the end of the period. If their team has scored, 4 out of the 5 questions that you'd asked during that time correctly, then they would earn, some kind of extra time, like an extra minute at recess, or they might earn book time or computer time if you have those available in your classroom. It also ensures high mastery levels because the way it's set up, and it also includes measured outcomes. So you're really tracking what's happening. You're structuring this, and as the teacher, you're floating through your classroom and you're checking in with those peers as they're teaching each other to make sure that they're learning the material that they need to. So you can come up and say, okay, so Johnny, I heard you say, 2 + 2 = 4. What do you think about that, Sam? Is 2 + 2 really 4, or a different character out of a book? If you want some more information about how to set up class-wide peer tutoring, and we're just kind of giving you a highlight due to time, and to kind of to get some ideas to you that you can use in your classroom, you can always visit this website at the bottom of the page. and they give you some more information. There's also other resources through Vanderbilt University and what they call the Iris Center, and you can Google that, and they give you some ideas specifically for reading and how this can be used for reading. And it's a really powerful tool. I've used it in my classrooms, co-taught in classrooms. I was a special education teacher in the United States, and we used it as a model in the classroom with our general ed students. So both teachers, myself and the general classroom teacher, circulated together and supported student learning, and it let us check in to make sure our students knew what was going on. Did they really understand the information, and was that information applicable? So could they pull that in different contexts? It also gave us that opportunity to check that information, that it wasn't just in this setting, but that they could share that information, and that they could also then apply that information in different ways and different questions that we asked, in different ways that their peers asked those questions. Another thing that's great as society keeps changing is technology. And that's because technology is creating many opportunities to enhance and support instruction. It's also, there's many different applications. And the great thing is, what used to take many hands to do with technology, we're kind of really able to scale some things to classrooms when you don't necessarily have the extra staff support to support you or your students during specific times of the day, or even at all. Technology kind of helps fill some of those gaps. It's not the be-all, end-all solution, and it doesn't fill every gap that you have, but it's certainly a bridge that you can use to help support your classroom if you use it effectively. We're going to highlight a few things here that could be the most helpful to you. And when we're talking about technology, we talk about both high and low-tech technology. And oftentimes we forget about such things as low-tech technology. We talked earlier about students who have trouble, they move around in the classroom a lot, or they fiddle with things a lot. There's always structured things that you can give them, such as fidget. So if you look at the picture here with the arrow, it's pointing to some fidget opportunities that gives them something quiet that they can do with their hands that helps them stay engaged, because many students disengage with the content because they're distracted by their own sensory needs at that moment, because they need that stimulation to keep awake or to try to do other things, or just not pay attention. But sometimes if you give them fidgets, it will help them kind of attend to what you're saying, because it gives them a simple, easy task to do with their hands that you've kind of structured and controlled. Like, you know what that fidget is, and they kind of know how to use it, and that it's a much more structured way to fidget and to be able to pay attention. Sue earlier talked about highlighters and highlighting information. That's also another low-tech application. You can encourage students to highlight information. You can also pre-highlight information for students for key things that they need to look for, because a lot of students get overwhelmed when you hand them, you know, a whole book to read. They get overwhelmed in the information that's contained in that book. So if you give highlights of key things that they need to be looking for, and I'm not necessarily saying give them the answers, but I'm saying point them in the direction. Don't let them hang and think, I don't know what my teacher's really looking for. This really kind of gives them the opportunity that you're kind of helping guide them without being right there beside them, having to guide them. You've kind of pre-structured that guidance. There's also clothespins for students who struggle with different writing mechanisms for fine and gross motors, that you can put a clothespin onto a pen or a pencil and help the student learn how to grasp their pencil. Something that's further down in the list that also kind of goes along with that is something called a pen again. And you can find those on Amazon and other retailer websites, as well as some supply stores that carry paper products and pens and pencils and those kind of things. The pen again is really designed to, it's an ergonomic designed pen that really kind of puts the student's hand in the position that it should be in for writing. It really helps students learn their proper grips for pens, which also then translates to helping students write more legibly, that you can actually read their handwriting and it won't be quite as sloppy. It also reduces some of the fatigue and things on the hand, because it's once again encouraging ergonomic grip on the pen. There's also transparent colored rulers. This is important for reading, especially. You can use it for other applications, but one of the most common is for reading. The rulers allow students to track line by line the information, because as earlier as we talked about, where students get overwhelmed in the amount of information given to them, this helps students to be able to track line by line that they're reading, because a lot of times you find that a student is trying to read, but then they'll skip a line because their eyes just didn't follow where the next line started. And these transparent rulers kind of help them see where they're headed because it's clear enough that they can see where they're going. But it's also opaque enough that it's keeping them focused on the line that's above the ruler. And that really helps them track. There's also something called embossed paper. It goes by some other names as well. Essentially, this is kind of a paper that has lines that students can actually feel, so it's a very tactile paper. So if you have students who struggle with going way off the line, their text dips down, this is a good way for them to feel where that line is. I've used it with some of my students who struggled with some of those kind of perceptual skills that they couldn't quite see the lines correctly. It really helped them focus on where that line was and improve the writing drastically. And it made writing easier for them, and they were not as frustrated in the classroom and performing writing assignments. There's also timers. Sue mentioned that earlier. There's various timers. There's time timer. There's Google itself actually offers a timer. If you Google in like 5-minute timer, Google also provides that option that you could display if you had a whiteboard with a projector. But there's also small timers. There's watches and various other things that you can use for timers to help students keep time. There's very obvious timers that make noises. There's silent timers that students can wear on their wrists that you can set for a predetermined, say every 5-10 minutes it's going to buzz, and it'll prompt the student to do a certain task. As Sue was talking about earlier with self-regulated learning and checking in on their learning, you could prompt them that way that every 5 minutes I'm checking in and I'm recording. Am I paying attention? Do I understand the information that the teacher's talking about? And how am I doing? And that really gives students the power to regulate their learning, because as students regulate their learning, they become lifelong learners, because there's going to be a certain point where they're not in school anymore and that they need to be able to learn new information on their own and figure out how to do that and how to regulate that piece. There's also something called sentence strips. This is great for especially younger students or students who are in older grades who are struggling with certain tasks. You can give a sentence prompt, and as you can see here in the image that the arrow is pointing to, that you can then provide words for them to fill in. So students who maybe struggle with, Sue was talking about earlier, finding the words that you would want to go in the blanks, this is a good way for them to practice that skill. It's also a good way for them to figure out how to form their sentences. This is a more structured option. You can also go to a much less structured option where they would have, a sentence strip and then a book full of words that they could put together and make their own sentences, and then maybe transfer that then to a writing assignment that you've asked them to write. So there's obviously all kinds of low technology that we call options, and they're all great solutions to support students. But as we all know, technology is still advancing. And so there's some high-tech options that we're going to talk about. Some of the most common that we all know is Word. That's been around for years. And it can be used to do many helpful things. The great thing about Word is you can create tables, which help students track information. In newer versions of Word, I believe it's Office 2011 and forward, allow for some text-to-speech options that you can utilize, and that's something that you have to specifically enable in the platform to do it. It doesn't come loaded by default, but it's built into that you can use, and that's a great option. It also provides highlighting and other options that students can use in just kind of a more tech-based environment. So some of the other things that we talked about in low tech can be translated into a high-tech option. There's other options as well. Google is another great option. It's a free resource generally that you can use through like Google Docs and Google Slides and various other things that Google offers. So if you don't have access maybe to Word, but you have a computer and the internet, you can log into Google and do some of the same things. It doesn't have as much capabilities as, say, Word does. But it does offer some great options and to bridge some of the gaps with technology and what you have available. Along the lines of notes, there's also a website that can be used. The logo that I'm kind of pointing to and circling right now is something called NoteStar, and that's an online platform. The great thing is students can set up an account, and you as a teacher set up an account, and you can go in and monitor students' work. You can encourage them to do certain tasks. and you can kind of lay out a plan together, which is very helpful to allow students to get some feedback from you without you having to be present to give them that feedback. One of the other options is, as we talked about earlier, that's available in Word, is speech to text and text to speech. It kind of goes both ways, but it's not always the same software that supports that. Word does support that. Microsoft and Mac platforms, so Apple, both support this feature. You just have to kind of know how to enable those. At the end of the PowerPoint, I'm going to give you a link to how you can enable those on your computer. It's generally the newer software operating systems that's an option in. I know pretty certainly it's in Windows 8. It's also in Mac, but I don't remember which operating level it became available in. It's in some forms been there for forever in Mac, but it's kind of changed forms of where you enable it in the later editions, and actually enabling text-to-speech besides just, speech-to-text and not just text-to-speech as it was in the past. There's also something called LabScribe. LabScribe is a really neat tool. It's not the cheapest of tools to use, but it's definitely an interesting tool that enables students to engage with content and also to record the information as you're speaking. So it really helps with that note-taking, especially students who will take the notes but then forget what you say. This gives them the opportunity to record what you're saying as they're taking the notes. It uses a special pen and a special piece of paper that's enabled. It's got a certain dot matrix that the pen can read that allows the student to write information. You can also get some versions that will enable you as the teacher to record information into the pen. And certain pens, not all of the additions of the pen, will allow headphones to be plugged into it so that you can put cues and things on the paper to help a student remember what to do. So maybe you have a student who struggles with the different steps that you need them to complete, or they don't remember to go to the back of the page. You can embed certain audio comments that when they take their pen and touch over a certain spot, that your audio will come on and say, remember to check your work before submitting, or did you complete section 2 of this assignment, different things like that. Inspiration's another interesting software platform. It's once again not one of the cheapest options. I'm trying to give you a bunch of different ways. Some things are free, some things do cost money. But Inspiration's a nice way of students being able to graph their information or to create webs of knowledge. It lets them kind of really put their information together in ways that they can understand it. It also helps students who struggle with, say, always finding the right word or spelling words correctly. If they can kind of guess like the first letter that they're wanting to write about, it'll come up with a series of options that you can include, so they can then pick the word that they need. So say they're looking for, water, and they can't think of exactly how to spell water. If they type in W, it'll kind of give them a series of options that you kind of can preset. It's got some prediction, and that's just something you'll have to play with a little more if you decide that you want that software. And with all of these that I'm talking about, the links below where I say image credits, because it's their logo, it generally also links to, except for certain things like Word, it links to the company's website where you can find more information. They also have, obviously, promo videos that you can watch to see if you think it's a good fit for your student, or if it's something that maybe your school would be interested in purchasing the rights to be able to use in the school. BlendSpace is another neat application of technology. And this is a free resource for the most part, and it really allows you as a teacher to plan your lesson. Sue was talking earlier about I do, you do, we do. You can kind of really set this model up. It allows you to pull YouTube videos and other files all into one lesson plan that you can use as the teacher, obviously, but you can also kind of set students off on their own, or as Sue talked about earlier, the flipped classroom kind of environment. So if students have access to the internet and a computer at home, then you can use BlendSpace to let the students then kind of go through these tasks and watch the videos that maybe you've made or you found somewhere and to do different activities and assessments, and it all tracks it right there in the system, which is very helpful. It's also helpful just to kind of, as a drop space as a teacher, to plan. That's personally how I've used it. It's just kind of a drop space to plan my lessons, of how I want to go through my lesson and what I want to specifically target. It allows me to have a place that I can drop my media that I know that I'm going to use in my classroom. So say I have a really excellent video demonstration of a science activity that I'm teaching students about chemical changes. And so I can pull up that video right from there in that blend space that I know right where everything's at. It's in the order that I've kind of predetermined, so that way I know how I'm tracking through my lesson and my information's right there and readily available for me. And so now we're going to kind of hear some of the other online resources that we found helpful, and that we hope that you'll find helpful as well. There's an organization called understood.org. It provides great information to help you learn more about learning differences and things that you can do in your classroom. There's also, as we discussed earlier, the National Association for Special Education Teachers, and it gives you great information about different special ed things. It's more specific to the United States, but you can obviously apply it to other things as well. So some of the things that it might suggest won't necessarily be always applicable, but you can definitely figure out ways that it would apply to you. There's the IRIS Center, and you can go there. It provides online web modules where you can learn different strategies, and some of the strategies that we've talked about today with you. It provides a very in-depth model of covering that information. Typically, they take between 1 to 3 hours to complete. They're self-paced. You're not scored or graded on them or anything like that, but it does ask you to reflect and to engage with the content. It includes videos and written text. I'm not for sure if it's available in other languages besides English, but it's definitely a great opportunity for you as a teacher to kind of learn some more about strategies and different things that you can do. For other instructional strategies that we maybe didn't get to here, that you're scratching your head going, well, I need to know something else, there's a website called For Teachers that you can go through, and they have some different instructional strategies that we just didn't have the time to cover today, as well as the KU class-wide peer tutoring, and that's that link that we talked about earlier. And so here's some of the technology things that we talked about. So there's other options besides some of the things I talked about in the slide with text-to-speech. Naturalreaders.com is one that it's actually a website that you can use, as well as I've linked some of the other things of how you can incorporate speech-to-text and text-to-speech on your own computer. And then there's the websites for some of the other things that we talked about. So if you have questions, we're more than willing to answer them. And we're going to give you our contact information again in case you want to get in touch with us. We know that kind of went by quickly in the beginning. Right now we're trying to get the PowerPoint to cooperate with us. If you forgive us, we're flashing PowerPoint slides very quickly. And like we said, you're more than welcome to contact us. You just put in your subject line when you do email us that it was from this webinar, so that we kind of have a context of the email. We'll be happy to get back in touch with you, but like we said, right now we're going to take some questions. You can put them in the chat box, you can raise your hand, and we'll respond.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any questions left in the question box at the moment, but I'm guessing people have your email address, and if they do have any questions in the future, they can contact you.
Most certainly.
Just a reminder to anyone who does have a question and wants to use their mic, if you can see the hand up icon, if you want to ask a question with your microphone, just click on that, and I'm going to see that, and I can unmute your microphone and you can ask your question. Right, I'll give it a couple more minutes just in case. Well, it looks like no one's got any questions to ask. But they do have your email addresses. Would you like me to forward them?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Right, okay, so there's going to be a recording of this webinar that's going to be sent out to all registrants sometime tomorrow. I'll add your email addresses in, so if any of you guys have any questions, feel free to email.
Great. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, that's
Thank you very
exciting.
much
Thank
to Kevin and Sue for the great webinar on behalf of ECAS. Are you guys good to?
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead and click out. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Okay, the webinar is now closing.
See which era.